Let's now turn our attention to the progress made in achieving the National Development Plan. Government first introduced the goals back in 2012 with the aim of achieving them by 2030. National Infrastructure Plan 2050 draft. Dr Miriam Altman joins us to discuss some of the challenges faced. Dr Altman, appreciate your time this evening. Now, South Africa's National Development Plan aims to achieve various goals by 2030, including improved education, reduced unemployment, and addressing spatial inequality. In your view, what are the key accomplishments, certainly, and the shortcomings of the NDP up to date?
Well, that's a big question for a soundbite, I guess. But anyway, thanks for having me. Look, in the current environment, with such slow growth and such high unemployment, one can be cynical as if nothing's happened. And the reality is that's not correct. A lot has happened. Not necessarily speaking just since the plan, but, the rate of employment creation did actually double between 2001 and 2017 as compared to the previous sort of 30 or 40 years. Municipal services rose, the social wage strengthened. In other words, the services to African households around municipal services, the delivery of formal housing, the access to electricity, infrastructure spending until about 2018 rose dramatically. So it was rising by over 5% in real terms each year. When we were getting economic growth, poverty rates were falling. Unfortunately, that's reversed. But, in terms of education, as well as, again, as cynical as one may be feeling, the reality is that school attendance, improved dramatically. The access to no-fee schools, again, you may be feeling cynical, but there have been measured improvements in mathematics performance, of course, off a very low base. But the kinds of things that really tell you that you could be getting to some kind of class mobility, in other words, that poor households could be moving up, is that 70% of secondary school graduates have more education than their parents did, and that the majority of bachelor's passes for people who finish matric and then they could go to university, that the majority of those now come from low income communities. So, there were some improvements and important ones that we've seen.
Dr. Altman, you sound very measured in your response, almost a little defensive, I'd imagine. But I'd like for us to talk about you as lead drafter of government's National Infrastructure Plan. What does that actually mean before we delve further into this conversation?
Oh, well, the first thing I should just say is just in response to what you say, there's no reason for me to be defensive about anything, just so you know. You would ask me what gone right and what gone wrong, and I think it's important to position some of the stuff that has, gone right, and we can talk about what's gone wrong, certainly. I'm a citizen like anybody else, so I'm not feeling defensive in any shape or form. I just try to do the numbers and try to understand what's going on.
Perfect.
Just to say. Now, the National Infrastructure Plan, so, I hope that we'll obviously come back to, more analysis of what's happened. But the National Infrastructure Plan that I've been working on with Infrastructure South Africa for the past couple of years, that's a plan to 2050 around, to be honest, every part of infrastructure delivery. So the first half of it was approved by Cabinet in 2022, and that focused on bulk infrastructure. So it focused on electricity, water, freight transport, and digital communications. And then the second half, which is sitting with Cabinet right now, looked at what we call distributed infrastructure, which looked at basically everything else. So human settlements, passenger transport, roads, what they call municipal trading services, which means like sanitation, municipal water delivery, that kind of thing, electricity at a municipal level. And then we look at cross-cutting areas like the draft that's with government right now looks at corruption and crime in infrastructure. The draft that was approved already by Cabinet looked at the funding and finance of infrastructure, just as examples. So that becomes a Cabinet-approved document. Now, as much as we look at 2050, there's a very, very strong focus on the next 3 years. and Cabinet wanted that so that it fits within government's planning framework and that it becomes as practical as it possibly could be.
Dr. Altman, I'd like to focus on two areas, and the one area obviously is housing. You know, we've just experienced that terrible fire in the city of Johannesburg. They killed over 70 people, and obviously all these individuals are congested in an area because there is little to no housing available for these individuals. Then, you know, we also talk about the rail network, and which is part of infrastructure and Transnet, and how that is seemingly dysfunctional at the moment. Hence, there's much traffic on the roads because rail is not operating at optimum. So, for those two areas, just put us into context, into where would you, or where was government expecting to be this time around, or by 2030, versus where we actually are, and what the challenges have been?
Well, there's no doubt that we're not where we're supposed to be. You know, on the one hand, and this is something we raised as, you know, when I was a National Planning Commissioner and the work we did there, and even in the National Infrastructure Plan, actually, that, you know, a draft was issued for public commentary, so people have seen it, but there's as I said, there's a version with Cabinet now based on the comments we got. But that plan is also very clear that we haven't gotten where we need to around, let's call it not just housing, but human settlements. That, you know, the apartheid era, a feature of it was that people were located in the wrong place. I mean, by design, and you know, that you would depend on long haul or passenger rail to get people from very distant locations to central areas. And a feature of it's meant to be government policy. Certainly the National Planning Commission was driving it. The NDP was driving it. And the National Infrastructure Plan that's coming out will be, which is that we've got to have densified settlements that are proper settlements that are integrated with community services, that are near to clinics and near to services and not far from work. And at the quality of planning, you know, we've really got to break away from old patterns. A lot of the housing, there have been millions of houses delivered, maybe 7 or 8 million houses, you know, more people living in formal housing, but a lot of the housing was positioned in big mega projects outside of cities because, quite frankly, it's the easiest thing to do. And it's quite unfortunate because it does entrench historical urban planning modes. So it doesn't create functional living. And of course, people want to live in the center of a city. So the people who are in this house, you know, there's been a lot of conjecture about who these people are, and I'm not sure that it really matters whether they're foreign, even whether they're illegal. Quite frankly, they're human beings. You know, in my view, you know, that may not be a policy position, but it's a human rights position, which is that, you know, they're human, so they're here, and we can see how they were living. It looks like it looks like a Dickens kind of situation, and so we clearly have a dysfunctional situation. In terms of passenger rail, you know, we look at passenger transport generally, and the point is that we need an integrated system. And we know that passenger rail has fallen behind. We make a point in terms of intergovernment management of services that passenger rail probably should go down to the lowest level of government that can manage it. And so in Gauteng, that would probably mean Gauteng. In Cape Town, that probably means Cape Town. You know, but that we need to start devolving these things because we're just not making, you know, process making a bit of progress, but it's not what it needs to be. Passenger transport is so central given where people are located.
So if I were to ask you to give yourself a performance, or the country or the government, mark them on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 obviously being where you started and 10 being the ideal situation, what would that number be? As objectively as you can.
No, you know, that's not a real, I'm just going to throw that right back at you. That's not a real question. Let's talk about real stuff.
Well, well, it is a question because you talked about statistics and you talked about numbers. right? Now, I would imagine that when this plan was set out, there were deliverable goals. That we're in 2012, we've come up with this NDP plan, and in 2030, this is where we'd like to be. So you can tick off on a schedule and say, these are the 10 goals, and this is where we're at. And I'm simply asking, based on that schedule and your goals in 2012, when this was created, where are you now?
Okay, so, I'm not going to get into, like, on a scale of 1 to 10. Like, I won't get into that kind of discussion. The SICE, the Engineering Society, where we talk about infrastructure, they do rate. I mean, I haven't spent time rating and thinking about where it would go. I'm more scientific, and so I would, if I'd been asked to do something like that, then I would do so. We, as the National Planning Commission, put out a report in December 2020 that reviewed, the part that I was particularly involved in was related to the full set of economic questions, and people could look at every major target and where we are as a country as against any target that people are interested in. And that report is available on the website, and I'm happy to give the link, for the show, to go out. In terms of infrastructure, the Engineering Society, SICE, they put out an I think it's an annual report card on the state of infrastructure, and they're, it's out of E, A to E, and E is the lowest, and the average is D. So, that's the state of, on average, and as I was saying, they break it down into fine detail so one can see in every single area where things are, and that's an example of where, you might look for that kind of thing.
So, sorry, Doc, if you allow me to come in there as we draw to a close, corruption and poor governance have been described as major obstacles to certainly achieving some of the NDP goals. What's your take on that? Are you in agreement? Do you think it's been a factor?
I'm sorry, corruption or
corruption and poor governance have been major contributors.
All my work has been focused on institution building and governance, and I'm an economist. I think our key economic issues, and certainly all the writing that I've been involved in as a National Planning Commissioner, we put out about 15 reports on this set of issues, and a summative report that we made available to you for this show, and the infrastructure plan as well is almost completely focused on strengthening the institution of government. Not just corruption, but leadership capability, human capability, accountability, so transparent reporting, the requirements of the kinds of capabilities needed to oversee everything from a bid committee to the delivery of infrastructure, strengthening partnerships and creating the capability in government to partner. It's central at the moment. And that's unfortunate because, I personally wish I were commenting more on economic questions, but the core economic question right now is how we get to building institutional capability. I mean, that's what creates, that creates resilience and almost, I've written about this before, it almost creates an immune system in relation to corruption. So I was chief of strategy at Telecom. And I was working with Sipo Maseko and, obviously the board to turn the company around. And one of the first things we did was to elevate the procurement function out of the shadows and make it a very strategic function and start creating institutional resilience. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've brought everybody to book historically, but it helps you to deal with everything that's going on in future. That's almost the best you can do. That is what you want to see. You want to see that you start short-circuiting behavior going forward. So that kind of thing, when you start getting more capability, you start building more institutions, you have more belief in the potential for growth and delivery, it starts to make it harder to be involved in crime, and it isolates those people actually. And that was actually what we tried to do at Telecom, and it worked very well.
Dr. Altman, I'm going to thank you so much for making the time this evening. I appreciate the conversation. We were discussing National Infrastructure Plan 2050 with lead drafter Dr. Miriam Altman.